sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by the Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. Well, he will not let your foot slip. He watches over Israel, neither slumber nor sleep. Yeah. Well, the Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. He will not let your foot slip. He watches over Israel, will neither slumber nor sleep. Yeah, he watches over you.
There's some fresh stuff from Dog Bark. Happy August. It's been a while since I've done this. It feels, the camera's focus breathing. That's what that's called. Camera's got to get used to it. That camera went to Italy with me and took lots of pictures of lots of stuff. Now it's back on the tripod, back on the stand doing its thing, and now it's focus breathing. So anyway, it's good to be back. Sorry I didn't, wow, that focus breathing is going to kind of drive me crazy. I haven't put out a lot of videos this week, obviously, and you've seen on the channel with, the Nancy's death took us all by surprise. We knew she wasn't well, but, yeah. So, and that, of course, set up some extra stuff that I had to do, stuff for Freddie, and Nancy's service will be live streamed on the church channel, so there'll be that if people want to watch. Nancy loved the Freddie and Paul show. Nancy loved being on it. She really enjoyed everything that went with that. Wow, this is really going to make me. Oh, the setting on the camera is wrong. That's why. Yeah, I fixed it. Hello, mate. And here's our friend Chemo. Chemo will be needs a Jamie. Rick's got a day job. Rick works for Intel. And we'll see how well Intel does. Hopefully he can keep his day job. My camera needs a little bit more adjustment. Up a little bit. See the top. It should be right here and not right here. It's a little too high. Then I'm coming up over the top. Yeah, I know. Let's try that. There's that better. That's better. Look at that. We're putting it back together. So yeah, it's good to be back. Had a great trip. Got about 15 videos I would have loved to have done this week. I've got all that stuff rolling around in my head, and more keeps coming in. And I had to cancel a couple of. It might be easier to lower the chair. Got a couple of randos conversations that I had to cancel this week. Sorry about that, but I will reschedule them. I'm going to give them priority, and we'll get them back. Now I'm right in the center. Focus. There we go. Okay. All right. Let's well, thank you. Hey, Freddie's joined the hive mind. Yeah, Busty really. So we did some grocery shopping yesterday, and then we did a little Freddie and Paul show, and well, now it's even worse. Did a little Freddie and Paul show, and it's over too far. Oh, this is terrible. There. Well, let's get to the questions. Aristos, last time in June. Next time you do questions, can you please start with a more formalized thoughts, or maybe do a video on the subject matter, please? Would love to see your brain picked on this question. It's like, on what question? I guess I should bring the screen. I didn't have a lot of chance to do a lot of branding beforehand. Okay, there it is. What question? Or what ways will Christianity evolve in the next 100 years? Yeah, that's his question. Yeah, everybody would love for me to spend a whole bunch of to do a whole video on your particular question. I get that. So I've, as those of you who've been following the channel know, I've been reading a lot about the popes. And I finished the second book, The Pope at War, and I've now started James O'Malley. He's a Jesuit priest, teaches at Georgetown, his degree from Harvard. James O'Malley's 2,000 Years of Papal History. He's got an audio course. I want to do a video on Jordan Peterson's Peterson Academy, because that's super interesting on a lot of levels. But there's all sorts of sort of audio courses out there that aren't accredited, and James O'Malley has one on the history of the papacy. And this morning on my levee walk, I was listening to the Peter, and I've just found it all just tremendously interesting. I'm really fascinated right now by the papacy, having been to Rome and thinking about how that functions. A lot of what I didn't realize is how much the papacy has changed in the last 75 years, in the last 100 years. The papacy has been through all of these different transitions. And James O'Malley also has a book on Vatican II that I've delved into before, but I'm going to go into it deeper this time, because it's very clear reading the history of the papacy in the middle of the 20th century, how much the papacy has changed. Yet O'Malley at the beginning of his course is very clear, and he's right, that when you're talking about the papacy, you're talking about a particular thing. You're not really talking about the Roman Catholic Church. What is the relationship between the Roman Catholic Church and the papacy? And talking and getting to know people like Cale and Father Eric, a lot of sort of low resolution assumptions I've had about the relationship between the Roman Catholic Church and the papacy has sort of been warped. I remember growing up, and I remember when one of the popes visited New York City when I was young. And I mean, it was a huge deal. It was a huge deal. And then, of course, John Paul II, had an enormous impact on the church. But the church is far, 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 far larger than just the papacy. And that's just the Roman Catholic Church. We're not even talking about the explosive growth of Pentecostalism in the last 100 years, or now this surge, at least that's visible to us in our little corner of orthodoxy in America. Or, one of the things that was clear to me reading these books about the papacy is that the papacy, since the rise of the Russian Revolution, has been just, tremendously focused on being anti-communist, even though you have very liberal Catholic clergy out there. And then, of course, there's the reaction to the French Revolution and the Protestant Reformation. So it's an enormous, enormous history. So then to think about the church in the next 100 years, where right now, so Megan Bashan just wrote a book, which seems like sort of the counter book to, somebody put it on Twitter, the counter book to Jesus and John Wayne. And Gavin Ortlund was named in that book as sort of, I thought Gavin Ortlund is someone who's influencing the church to the left. Gavin Ortlund's a pretty conservative, reformed guy. But the way that, well, first you had, of course, the counterculture, which gives birth to the hippie movement, which gives birth to this massive transformation in Protestant hymnody that has completely transformed the North American church, and in many ways the world church. And technology is a big piece of that, in terms of musical technology and stage technology, just in terms of churches, going to these cathedrals and asking myself, let's say in the cathedral in Milan, what is a church? And then, I did some processing of that in our Sunday morning estuary group, and thinking about all of the immense transformations that have happened since the Second World War, and thinking about Michael Sartori's Boomerality, which was the last sort of major video I put out this week, and thinking about how the experience of the Second World War transformed the world and transformed our culture and transformed the generation that is the baby boomers that have been so influential in North American culture and therefore world culture. One of the things that I'm often impressed by when I visit Europe is Americanization, just how powerful American culture is, and those transformations. And now we have the internet, now we have YouTube, and just I don't think we have any idea how massive the transformations we're going to see in the next 100 years. Part of what happened in, let's say, again, back to the papacy, part of what happened with Pius XI didn't like his picture taken. Pius XII was the first pope to go on the radio. And then they start holding these mass meetings off his balcony. Now we look at that and we think, oh, popes must have been doing this forever. No, that's a very, very new thing. Pope Pius XII, I won't get into that whole story, but it's in the book, basically had a movie made about him. And what you see with Pope Pius XII is sort of the Roman Catholic Church getting into the media space. And of course, the Roman Catholic Church will be deeply influential in Hollywood. And this is amazing, given this, at least portrayed in the book, given this tremendously defensive and reactive posture that grew in the papacy to modernity and modernism, of course, the French Revolution, and then the Russian Revolution, and then, at least in the books that I read, all of this conspiracy concern about the Protestants, the Jews, and the Masons. And and of course, and then towards the end of the Second World War, Pius XII sort of, should we broker a deal to have peace with the Nazis, to have the Allies sort of, ally up with the Nazis to make sure that the communists don't sort of gobble up half of Europe, which is exactly what they did. So it's just an incredible, we've lived through incredible times, and the next 100 years in the church. Now we're in North America, and I think all over the world, it happened in Europe first. We're dealing through the death of one whole form of church. And over the next 20 years, sort of the builder churches and the boomer churches are going to die in North America. And when I think about Living Stones dying, Living Stones is in many ways a boomer church. It's not a mega church by any means, but in many ways, the culture of it was neo-evangelical boomer, and that mode of church is dying. And there are going to be churches closing all over North America. And the Protestant churches that close all over North America, unlike beautiful churches of stone in Europe, are not going to be preserved. I'm thinking if Living Stones basically becomes non-viable in the next year or two, that the strategy for maintaining the congregation will probably come at the expense of the building. If we would sell the building, then the church itself would have a big cash inflow, and then this property here, and this building itself is nothing special. This building was built by Harold Camping, and it's about as plain and utilitarian as, public schools in Sacramento have more architectural design than this building. And so this building would be flattened, and here on this corner, there'd be probably a gas station and a Taco Bell. And the place that was Living Stones will be remembered no more. Unlike, let's say the Pantheon, which was this dramatic Roman temple that gets converted into a church/temple. And I already talked about the relationships between cathedrals and temples. So over the next 100 years, we are going to see changes in the church in the world that will probably even dwarf the changes we've seen in the last 100 years. We've seen that with the rise of televangelism. And, I've got sort of grim, the portion of my Consciousness Congress that there's a little grim grizz in, where, he continues to make the point that this semblance of community that we enjoy right now together is not unreal. It's very real. And, so to what degree, how does exactly this relate to church? And you've got Word on Fire and Bishop Barron, and of course you had other Catholics on TV, and you had Protestants, of course, on TV. And we've talked a lot about Christian presence on YouTube, and how in many ways the Orthodox have sort of, the Orthodox, even though the Orthodox priest that was a friend of my colleague up in Roseville, when my colleague, who sort of came into church planting and planted his church in Rockland in the seeker methodology, and talked to his Orthodox friend about evangelism, and the Orthodox priest said, well, we're not ready to do evangelism. We don't have our monasteries or our cathedrals built yet. Once we have our monasteries and our cathedrals, then we'll start to do evangelism. But it's quite clear that in the online space, the Orthodox hasn't waited for monasteries and cathedrals to start their evangelism. They're riding the Peterson-Peugeot pipeline in terms of evangelism into Orthodoxy. So even if the Orthodox Church ostensibly requires, the kinds of buildings that we toured in Riverside, California, evangelism is happening. And what would happen? Is there anyone in Orthodoxy that might look at this and say, this is clearly out of control, and maybe we should stop this and order Jay Dyer and Jonathan Peugeot and Stephen DeYoung and Father Domik to to cease and desist all YouTube transmissions. Is that going to happen? No. Is there, if the patriarch in Constantinople or whatever patriarch in whatever segment of the Orthodox Church ordered the priests and the laity to stop producing Orthodox material on YouTube and on podcasts, would they stop? No. So the Orthodox priests' comment to my friend about evangelism in America not beginning until we have our monasteries and our cathedrals, sorry, it's happening. And, you know, people celebrate it. So church over the next 100 years, good grief. Thank you, Rick. So yeah, if you want to check out my travelogue videos in the membership section and see the Milan Cathedral, some of the beautiful cathedrals of Europe. Rick has gifted 50 memberships, and you can click on them above and get a free membership. The Patriarch of Antioch could change a lot of it. Yeah. How do I get a hold of the Patriarch in Constantinople? Yeah, so Freemasons didn't want degrees online until COVID and things changed. You know, we are also at a point where we have COVID's running rampant in Sacramento, by the way. Everybody and their grandmas have COVID right now. As I mentioned in last Sunday's sermon, too, there's a tremendous amount of anxiety. You've got the poly crisis and the meta crisis and the meaning crisis and wars and rumors of wars and pandemics and environmental collapse and population collapse and. I mean, we're astoundingly pessimistic about the next 100 years, despite the fact that we imagine that we're somehow in control of our own destiny and that people are generally good, blah, blah, blah. These kinds of spirits, I think, have fallen on hard times. So how the church is going to respond to these and even the question of, and this is part of the reason of my fascination with the papacy, what is the church? And I continue to believe that so many of the insights of Protestantism have just simply won. And Protestant, you know, many of the insights of Protestantism, I think, were implicit within the Roman Catholic Church. And of course, if you look at Vatican I and Ultramontanism, and then Vatican II and this sort of egalitarianism, when you look at all of the strife that's going on online in the Roman Catholic Church, and I mentioned before that a beautiful young couple that I married, they didn't come to Living Stones because he had friends that were he had a friend that was pastor, a former roommate of his was pastoring, I think it was a Methodist church in Sacramento. So they went to that church, and then I think that church folded. And so he and his wife, she grew up conservative Reformed, and he grew up sort of Pentecostal, non-denominational. They're going to a Latin Mass conservative Catholic church in Sacramento and loving it. And it's like, none of us can predict what's going to happen in the church in the next 100 years. It is going to be a wild ride. And we are living in interesting times. So sorry, Arista, that's not a dedicated video to it. Maybe it'll make a video. But it's a great question. And Kale, I don't know if you're back. I don't know if you're back. It was so much fun. I'm getting back from Europe, and I'm seeing all this posting on Twitter of Kale in Europe. I can't wait to get together with Kale again and talk shop and hear, because, you know, travel like that it does transform you, and it does open up vistas, and it helps give a different kind of knowledge. And so, of course, for me, so much. So Cale, we'll have to, it's going to take more than one live stream, Cale. We're going to have to probably set up a whole bunch of conversations. I am Hunter Glenn. Hunter Glenn is in fact who he is. All right, second question. After I've spent only 20 minutes on the first question. I'm streamlined today. What is the best way to keep a family together when they want nothing to do with each other and aim to become estranged with each other? How do you prevent that from happening, and how do you heal relationships between family members? Wow. If there is a question for the world today, that is the question. Because, so we've got the Northwestuary coming up in September, and see Grail Country for details of that. I think tickets have been selling well. And the whole focus of that event is going to be on community. And so when I've got an event like this coming up, I just sort of ponder for the next few months and sort of grab things. Okay, what do I want to say about this? The baby boomers are an interesting generation now that they are starting to pass, because of course divorce comes up in there, and Michael Satori followed up his boomerality video with another video, sort of trying to make peace with Mark and Mark Parker, who sort of stepped in as the boomer quintessential, even though and in some ways he is Southern California Pentecostal, flight into Buddhism for a while and back from there. I'm depending on where you cut the Xers and the boomers, I'm just sort of on the cusp between them, 1963. So, and then many of us who are sort of at the end of the boomers sort of look and say, our upbringing was very different from those who were born in the 50s, and especially the early 50s. So am I a boomer? Am I not a boomer? I don't know. But of course, what formed the boomers? Again, it was the Second World War. You had the beginning of the 20th century was a dramatic century. And the 21st doesn't seem any less dramatic. Fortunately, we haven't had the scale of war we had in the 20th century. But every scale of just about everything is enormous. And I've been thinking about the Olympic ceremony and Peugeot's video about that, and thinking about what the sacred is. Of course, John Vervaeke talks about the sacred, and I haven't started yet. Elizabeth Oldfield's book on her story, even though I got a fair amount of her story on my conversation with her. It's rough on families. I played some dog bark at the beginning, and I'm going to, if any of you are musicians, I know a bunch of you are, and so send me your videos on YouTube that you'd like me to use as branding. It has to be original music. Now, Dog Bark's music is very old music, because he usually does the Psalms, but he does his own music to it. And Emily's song that I'll use for branding at the end of it. Just go ahead and send me some more stuff for branding from the music that you do, and I'll play it at the intro and outro for the live streams. But in many ways, the container of marriage for so many generations was privation. And Rod, on the Not Estuary stream that Chad just did recently, commented that the first dollar that people get beyond subsistence is usually taken in service of privacy. And so part of what has destroyed marriage is just plain affluence and options. It doesn't take a a brilliant psychologist to know that our baser impulses pull us away from marriage. And in that way, marriage is a discipline. And like many disciplines, the fruits of marriage, of staying married and being faithful and doing that hard work are come later. I mean, fruit is such a beautiful image because, first you have the blossom, and then you have the bud, and then the little fruit begins to develop, and it takes time for that fruit to mature and to become ripe. And, part of what I learn in now, my next anniversary is coming up, and so my next anniversary will be 36 years, is that, the fruit of 36 years, it takes a while to develop. And with this trip to Italy for the marriage of one of my sons, and all of my children were there, it's hard to express just how deeply meaningful it is. And, to keep a marriage together, some people have easy marriages. They just do, and God bless them. They're blessed. A lot of other marriages aren't anywhere near so easy, and marriages get buffeted by all kinds of things. And, one of the things that happened with the advent of social media was really hard on marriages. There were people my age that they, got on Facebook and suddenly started reconnected with old flames, and marriage is hard. Keeping a family together is hard. And so then there are all sorts of ways of, let's say, well, we're going to homeschool, and we're going to have dinner together, and we're going to, sort of build high walls around the family. And those can be tremendously helpful and are important. But I've known families that have done that, and it's all exploded because the high walls just created a pressure cooker, and the dysfunction of the parents or calamities that happened with the children just created so much pressure that they created high walls, and those high walls became a pressure cooker. And so the explosion that destroyed the family after was even greater. It's deep ironies that we have so much more money and time and so much more knowledge about psychology and medicine, yet in many ways all of that power contributes to the destruction of what maybe could be counted on easier in other generations simply by privation. And just saying again, there were many bad marriages and terrible situations that people were stuck in because they just didn't have the money to leave. And even today, it's not uncommon for me to hear about divorced people that continue to live together with their children just because they actually legally got a divorce, but never had enough money for one of them to move out. And so they live together and are even dating other people while living together, and sometimes even bringing, boyfriends and girlfriends into the home. And it's, I just hear these kinds of stories and I just think, good grief. And yet, if you go back over the back catalog of Rando's conversations, how many of our stories haven't started with the breakdown of the nuclear family? Or maybe, right now with the number of out of wedlock births, you have homes that haven't even launched, and children born into situations of chaos. And people don't understand that what that actually breeds over multiple generations is conservatism, because and sometimes it works well and sometimes it doesn't, because people say, no matter what happens, I am not going to inflict on a coming generation the misery that I endured. And sometimes that means they don't have children. And sometimes that means they become control freaks. And sometimes it helps them, I think, Eamon and Catherine's case, sometimes it helps them, create a beautiful marriage and have healthy boundaries and raise children. But no family is perfect. So, there's a ton of stuff out there, a ton of good, important rituals to try to help keep your family together, but there are no guarantees. And building walls around the home and protecting children from influences, and maybe not having set in the house, or at least keeping a strong rein on set, and not giving your children the internet. I feel tremendously blessed by the fact that even though my children were there sort of at the dawn of the internet, it wasn't what it was then. And I did lie to my children growing up, because I got a TiVo, and my children only knew, the only TV my children knew was what I put on TiVo. Because I locked TiVo down because you could. And so I actually I had a cable contract, so there was Nickelodeon, and there was Disney TV, and there was all that stuff. And I just, they'd hear about, SpongeBob SquarePants, and said, "Do we have Sponge?" No. Just have it on TiVo. I never recorded it, so they never saw it. But of course, they grow up and they learn and they get out into the world, and then they're going to have to make those decisions. And there's always the really difficult dilemma of, do I try to equip my children to deal with the media by giving them little bits amounts, sort of a vaccination pattern, or do I just sort of shelter that from it completely and just figure that they're going to have these experiences only when they're older and able to handle them? I mean, that decision is such a difficult one. And I've seen people work both ways, and I've seen it go well both ways, and I've seen it be a disaster in both ways. So again, there's just no guarantees. The just will live by faith. And so, as Peterson says, in a sense, when you bring a child into the world, that child is, you have to in some ways turn that child over. Well, you turn that child over to the care of God, and you turn that child over to a really difficult world. So, boy, really tough. Clint D. Is Synod a live action form of internal family systems? No, Synod is a live action form of family systems. It's not internal family systems. It's good old regular family systems that gave birth to internal family systems. What would Mississippi Squirrel Revival look like at Synod? The old Ray Stevens song. I don't know. I'll have to look it up, but I don't have time to look it up now. So, how do you respond to Vervaeke's critique of Christianity in his Meaning Crisis series, namely that Paul's struggle with his Roman citizenry, rules and justice, and his road to Damascus moment, compassion and forgiveness, was extrapolated by him in his relationship of knowing the God of history? Thus, in Paul's moment of processing his own inner conflict, he inadvertently projected this same inner conflict between justice and compassion as it belonging to God. I'll give you a little, if you've never read much New Testament scholarship, I'll tell you something. There is no end to trying to get into the head of Paul of Tarsus. And whether you want to credit the vision from the road to Damascus on psychological factors, it's very clear reading the New Testament that Paul was a man who had regular visions. He had all sorts of visions. He alludes to them frequently in his letters. But among all of those visions, obviously the vision on the road to Damascus was a really critical one. Now, this gets into, Rod Dreher sent me a copy of his upcoming book. I haven't had a chance to read it yet because I've been obsessing about popes. My ADHD, I do. It's not that I lack focus. It's that my focus goes all over the place. But I want to mention this book. Oh, come on, Kindle. I've mentioned it before. Barbara Aaron writes, oh, come on, Windows. There you go. Barbara Aaron writes, Living with a Wild God, a non-believer's search for truth about everything. It's a fascinating book. about her visions. She ever since she was a child, she would have these dramatic visions. And Barbara Ehrenreich is a very sane person. She wrote Nickel and Dimed about, living years ago. Paul of Tarsus had visions. And now the recent Christianity Today recently had a paper by someone from Westminster Seminary, not a liberal place, that asked the question, was Paul of Tarsus a slave? And he makes a very cogent argument that Paul's parents were likely taken out of their ancestral home in the area of the tribe of Benjamin and taken to Tarsus as slaves. But because slavery didn't necessarily extend to children, Paul likely grew up in a slave household. And that sort of takes on, you can find the article on Christianity Today. I mentioned it in a sermon before I went to Italy, but it adds to the really unique mixture of who Paul was. Paul was an extraordinarily interesting person in terms of both a diaspora zealot that led to his stoning of Stephen, and then sort of the 180-degree turn where he became this missionary to the Gentiles, where he tours these synagogues all over Asia Minor and into Greece and blows them up with his insistence that Jesus is the King of Israel, the definitive Messiah. And of course, that term Messiah is very conflictive. We've talked about that before. And, I'm not surprised by Jacob's reactivity to Paul of Tarsus. Paul of Tarsus drew very, very strong reactions, but then his letters become sort of this, this significant portion of the new canon for the church. It's astounding. Or simply, he just lied a lot. Jacob, you cannot look into his head. You might say he's wrong. You might say he's deceived, but you just think he lied. Yeah, I don't know. So, what question? Oh, Vervaeke and Paul. New Testament scholars have long tried to get their mind around Paul of Tarsus. You can read N.T. Wright's biography of Paul that was out not too recently. F.F. Bruce, a significant scholar out of the UK, wrote a really wonderful book on Paul. He's a tremendously important figure in terms of world history. And so I was listening to John O'Malley's History of the Papacy, and of course he starts with Peter. And it's an interesting question: who was more influential in the founding of the church, Peter or Paul? It's a tough call. We know a lot about Peter, but the kind of knowledge we have about Peter is different from the kind of knowledge we have about Paul, because of course we have Paul's letters. So and again, this holds true of just about everyone, worldviews limit analysis. And so if, let's say for John Vervaeke, the visions of Paul, I don't know if that would be true of John. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but the visions that Paul had, including his vision on the road to Damascus, was a psychic projection. I mean, we don't even know what visions are. We don't even know what dreams are. Peterson is dead right that there's so little we know about ourselves. It's astounding. So, of course, Paul sincerely believed that the risen Jesus of Nazareth was addressing him from heaven, and he believed it to such a degree that everything changed in his life. And he, who probably had a fairly successful, well-loved life among his people, became hated and reviled, and often was, Jews who did not like his interpretation of Jesus tried to kill him on numerous accounts. Greeks tried to kill him, and finally Nero kills him. someone, let's say if Paul had a therapist, and that therapist would sit down in a nice, cozy, middle-class, well-appointed office and say, Paul, and tell him, okay, so you think you saw this Jesus. You never met him in real life. You sort of missed him to the best of our knowledge, but he appealed to you from heaven. And so now you've gone around talking about his resurrection, even though, unlike Thomas, no evidence of touching his wounds or anything like that. But you had a vision. You have all of these visions. And is it really such a good idea to hop onto this Jesus train, Paul? Wouldn't your life be better if you just sort of continued to live in a suburb in Jerusalem and were a good Pharisee, at least until, of course, the Romans came in 70 AD. But Paul didn't even live that long. So Paul, wouldn't a nice therapist tell the Apostle Paul that he should probably not follow this Jesus guy and traipse all over the Roman Empire and have fights with his own people and have fights with Peter and have fights with just about everyone and have fights even with the churches that he helped start, like in Corinth? And wouldn't you have a better life, Paul, if you just gave up the whole Jesus thing? And it doesn't seem like a hard argument to make that would say yes. And yet Paul did not do it. That is why I don't think Paul was a liar. Too much invested in the lie, too much suffering invested in the lie. If he was a liar, he could have just stayed a Pharisee and maybe a quirky one and lived a nice life in the suburbs of Jerusalem. But he didn't. Spent most of the rest of his life imprisoned. And his own people attempted to kill him because they thought he brought a Gentile into the temple. Crazy story. So, no, John can certainly join the crowd of speculating as to how on earth can we account for Paul of Tarsus. But for a very long time, scholars have been attempting to get a handle on him, and it seems he has yet to be exhausted. So, all right. Hunter Glenn. Who are some people you'd like to dialogue with and why? Who are some people you'd like to watch dialogue with each other and why? I already, as you saw with the Vervaeke thing, I'd like to see Peterson and Peugeot and Vervaeke really sit down and talk about AI. Because when you talk to Peterson is, he's using it and he's using it like crazy. And people are putting together large language models of his work, of the New Testament, and he's using it to check his interpretation of New Testament texts. And I hear that and I think, wow, because when I look at interpretations of the Bible on AI, it's like, and when I look at, I shared the other day when I asked Chat GPT, I had this little container and I had to put dog food in it. And I had to sort of measure out how much dog food my dog would need when the dog was where we had sent the dog. And I thought, I wonder what the volume of this is. And I thought, well, I can easily figure this out. It wasn't listed on the container, so I didn't know. But with I could just, I studied math. I could figure out the volume of a bucket. That's not very hard. But I thought, I wonder if Chat GPT can figure out the volume, or a Bing chat can figure out the volume of the bucket. So I took the measurements and I gave the measurements, this little kind of a story problem, to Bing. And it didn't do well at all. So then I rephrased it, tried to make it a little easier for Bing. And it didn't do well at all. And I thought, this thing can't answer a high school math story problem. So then I went to Wolfram Alpha and did it there, and it got it no problem. So Peterson's using it. Vervaeke is all the way, both sides of it, of this is a danger to planet Earth, and we'll have AI gurus and sages and holy people. And then Jonathan Peugeot, of course, is like, this is just regurgitating human foolishness. It's not, So I want to see the three of them sit down. Now, your first question I've actually thought about a lot, and my answer, I sometimes think, oh, I'd like to talk to this high status person and this high status person. And, according to John, I'll get a conversation with Jordan at some point, and that'll be great. But, I was talking to Chad the other day, and I was listening to Chad do his thing on the Friday Morning Nameless, and what Chad said was exactly right to me. When I go on a live stream, I want to talk to you people. You people know me, and to a degree, I know you, and it's actually in the context of knowing and being known. That's where all the meaning and enjoyment, and that's the good stuff. And it's not unlike family. And in terms of a meaningful life, yeah, status has its benefits. It also has its liabilities. And I know that you can, if your job is to make a living on YouTube and to grow a big channel so you can have sponsors and make a living, then by all means climb the status ladder and get bigger and bigger names on your channel and do all of that. But, I've talked a little bit about my brief interchange with Eric Weinstein at ARC. And, I just, since I've been commenting on these people online, I thought it only fair when I saw them to just introduce myself and say, this is me. You don't owe me anything, but just thank you for your work. Say something kind, bless them. And I did that to Eric, and Eric's like, you haven't been fair to me. Oh, well, I'd like to hear how I haven't been fair to you. And so, and I said, because ARC was just a lot of people around. I said, just, if we get a chance to talk, let's talk about it. And then I reminded him of the day later. And then when I had a few minutes and he seemed to have a few minutes, I said, well, let's talk. And he began to talk about some things. And I saw immediately that in the 5 or 10 minutes that we would have to sort of in a little corner there, that we weren't going to get anywhere. He was not in any way going to get to know who I was. He doesn't watch my videos. And I've watched a number of his, but I'm sure there's way more out there that I haven't watched. And so I just basically said, can I pray for you? Because we talked about prayer. And he said, yes. And so then I prayed for him. And I will likely never have a relationship with Eric Weinstein or Brett and Heather or Jordan Peterson, an in-depth relationship with Jordan Peterson. I've got something of a relationship with Jonathan Peugeot and John Vervaeke, partly because, of course, the way this thing has unfolded, but they're both tremendously busy people now. And they've got, and YouTube and the video thing has become a part of their career, and it's become a part of mine, and it's made me more busy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's sort of connected to the family question, because, what's really meaningful to me is, when, and the problem again, I've got the Dunbar scale. I can't do this with all of you. And I'm sorry about that. And I'm sorry about the limitations on the relationships that I can have with most of you. But, when Chad and I were working on something, and so he said, oh, can I talk to you a couple minutes? And so, I jumped on a Zoom call with him just quickly, just he and I, and we got to chat. And, that's deeply meaningful, because what gives me joy is to watch. I look at how Chad has grown in just his life and his channel and his knowledge and his wisdom and his person. I look at how he's really flourished, partly because of this little corner and all of the relationships between him and many of you, and playing with YouTube and playing with branding and playing with music while he's a Tyler, and he's a husband, and he's a member of his church, and he's a significant part of the AA community in his neighborhood. And I just look at how Chad has flourished, and I think that I have had a small part in that. And I think, yes, those are the relationships. Those are the conversations. That is what I desire, because I can climb a status hierarchy. I can pester Jordan Peterson to have my conversation with him, and I can pester John and Jonathan to have more talks with them. And maybe I'll get on Lex Fridman, and maybe I'll get on Joe Rogan, and maybe I'll maybe I'll climb the status hierarchy and have a bigger YouTube channel, have more money coming in, and yada, yada, yada. And that would be wonderful. There's nothing wrong with any of that. If you want to create a career on YouTube and grow a big channel and be influential culturally and do all of that, just do it. It's great. It's fine. But what I find meaningful is watching how the little nutrients that have accumulated in this little corner have fed Chad and Grizz and Neil and Kale. And now the problem with making lists is that there's 100 people that I won't name here, but has fed how many people? And it's many of the people that they show up on the live streams, and they find that they have friends together. And we had at our Sunday morning estuary, one of the guys who comes in. He doesn't watch a lot of the videos. He watches some of them, but he just comes into the estuary meeting. He's never been to church. He's never visited church. But he just said Sunday morning, he says, because we didn't have estuary for 3 weeks because I was gone and nobody wanted to do it while I was gone, lead it. So it's fine. But he just said, I want you to know how important this group is to me. That's why I do this. That's why I do this. And so the conversations I want to see, yeah, it's fun to have Peterson and Peugeot, and it's fun to watch Peterson talk to Elon Musk, and it's fun to, someday Peterson's going to talk to Donald Trump, and that's going to be a fascinating conversation. And it's fun to watch Jacob do Jacob's things, and Jacob is Jacob, and it's fun to watch his little corner of the corner flourish. And it's just to watch people flourish and grow because of our relationships with one another. And that is how human beings flourish. And this gets back to the family question. When our relationships with each other are poor, well, the container only has the value of the relationships within. And containers sort of pinch on us to say, okay, don't abandon the relationship, stay in the relationship. And that's why a real live church of real live people is more of a container than, let's say, YouTube relationships, because we've got skin in the game, we've got money in the game, we've got this building between us, we've got this organization between us, we have these events between us, all of that becomes stuff between us. And in a family, you have children between you and relationships, but it's in these relationships that we as human beings either flourish or wither. And to create containers where human beings flourish, whether they be churches or schools or families or businesses or even crazy things, the likes of which we can barely comprehend, because is this little corner real? It's real enough to watch the flourishing of how many of you, and to, when you look at us today and when you look at us 3 years or 5 years ago, you can see that, this is Neil Daedelus's test. He talks about it often. He's like, okay, my involvement in this corner, has this made me love Jesus more? Yes. Has this made me be a better member of my church? Yes. Has this made me be a better husband? Yes. Has this made me be a better father? And when relationships are flourishing, and when relationships are helping us meet each other, then they bear abundant fruit for the world beyond us, for our families. And of course, when you bring a child into this world and you have a good family, and that family flourishes, and that child is well formed, and I would say as a Christian, that child is formed in the image of Christ to be ready to have a cruciform posture for an ungrateful world, to go out and to bless the world. These relationships are the most powerful things that we see around us, because they are bringing life into the world. So it's not so much picking out the high status people that I want to talk to. It's talking to someone when I think maybe a conversation with this person is going to bring a little seed of flourishing in their life that then will begin to germinate and grow and become fruitful over long periods of time. I look at Job's family and Job's two little boys, and I think about, my first conversations with Job and, how Job has flourished, And I think that's why many of you continue to participate in this little corner. I made Andrew a Catholic, and I'm super happy about that. I couldn't be more pleased. And so, you're making people Catholic, you're making people Orthodox. I'm making people flourish in churches and hopefully making their churches flourish. And Bill Hybels used to say the church is the hope of the world. So yeah, that's what this is for. And in terms of, why do I've got to, hopefully once my schedule calms down, I've got a whole bunch of funerals to do lately, but once my schedule comes down, get some more randos conversations and just continue to seed into the community and just to watch how, Christian Baxter and Grim Grizz and Chad and, the Grail Country and the Meaning Code and Kale Zeldin, and just watch how I've had a part in this multiplication, flourishing in YouTube that has actually impacted people's lives. That is why I do this. That is what gives me joy. So that sort of determines who I talk to. One of the issues that you've pointed out in the CRC is the retirement fund. I'm not sure if many people know that pastors don't necessarily get enrolled in Social Security in the U.S. Do you have an opinion about that? It's turned out to be a good idea to give clergy an exemption. I don't know a lot about the clergy exemption. It was created because there were some churches that, because of their doctrine, found participating in Social Security to be against their religion. And so certain clergy have had that. The Christian Reformed Church is not there. Now, I could have, when I first started to have to pay my own Social Security tax. So clergy are technically self-employed. And if you work for an employer, usually your employer does all of this withholding, which is really handy because the government gets all that money at the end of the year. There's maybe just a little difference. With clergy, you have to pay your own taxes and you pay all of your own Social Security taxes. And so it's really tempting for some clergy to just take an exemption and not pay their Social Security tax. But then they're also not in the Social Security system. Now, how long will that system hold up? Who knows? But yeah, I'm enrolled in the Social Security system, and Social Security the CRC Minister's Pension Fund. I heard some things this year that I had never been told, like this is sort of a bare bones safety net. And I always thought, yeah, and then of course, as the older I get, and then now that my pension is 7 years away, I'm looking at the amount. It's like, that doesn't even cover Livingstone's salary. So it's going to be, yeah. So, and that's, and that's why I'm thankful to many of you, because actually, unlike many clergy, I mean, when I retire, I can continue to do YouTube. That's what I hope to do. Because I love doing YouTube, and because it opens up opportunities for me, and because I see flourishing. So yeah, I don't think it's a good idea to exempt from Social Security, but don't take financial advice from me. And that's, people want me to give political advice. They want me to give, don't ask me for advice from other areas that I don't know much about. Sure, I've got opinions, but what do I know? I know some things about some things, but I'm not your financial planner. That is not my gig. So, what is the difference between a constitutional and a confessional church? Well, so the RCA is supposed to be constitutional and the CRC confessional. I don't really understand what a constitutional church is, but I know what a confessional church is. And when I talked to the RCA about their structure and how in many ways their structure sort of led to kind of the implosion of the Reformed Church in America, Yeah, I was really interested in the language of a confessional state that popped up in the Pope and Mussolini book. It's fascinating, fascinating. Noah, President Foxman, do you enjoy pineapple on your pizza? Yes. Do you have a preferred topping for pizza? Not really. I like good pizza. So when I was in Naples, so on the trip was one of my daughter's boyfriends came on the trip, and he's a chef. And so part of the role he played on the trip was, so you get into a new country and it's like, well, what do you eat? And he's like, he went every city we went into, he had like these lists of restaurants that said, okay, well, our Airbnb is here. Maybe, let's try eating at this place. And so Naples is like the birthplace of pizza. And so I ate pizza every night. There are different kinds of pizza. Ate a deep fried pizza. That was good. But some of the best pizza was like one of the oldest pizzerias back to the 19th century in Naples. They only have like 3 pizzas on their menu. Their pizzas are only €6. Lines going out the door. We couldn't even get in with our big group that we had. But we finagled a way to get some pizza from them, and it wasn't even cheese on the pizza. It was the bread and the tomato sauce and a little bit of spice, and it was like, wow, that was delicious pizza. There's something to be said for, in America, so much of our food is industrialized and mass produced, and when you go to a place where people just use real ingredients, some of the best meals I've had have been given to me from some of the poorest people in the world. Because, well, they might not have a lot, but what they have, they know how to use. And people have taste buds. And if you've got time, we in the West usually have more money than time. Poor people usually have more time than money, and they just sort of perfect. So Italian pizza was really good. I had pizza in a bunch of the other cities on and off, but in every city we went to, we tried to focus on. Now, my daughter's boyfriend wasn't with us the whole trip, so there were portions where we had to go out on our own looking for food, and it didn't always go well. But in each city, we tried to sort of get food that was like that. So in Florence, I had Florentine steak, which was delicious. Although one of the best steaks I had was in Rome. It was a really delicious steak. Food prices were just all over the map, but it was great. Do you ever go into stream Civilization? Me playing Civilization? Stream it? I don't know. I'm not the best Civ player, but I enjoy playing it in the way that I enjoy it. So my son is much more of a gamer, and so he plays to win. But we usually sort of have a Germany versus America standoff where I've got a strong Navy and an Air Force, and he's got a strong Army. And so he can't get at me. That's usually where the stalemates. And Civilization, once the game gets long enough, it sort of bogs down because there's so much to manage, and then it's a little less fun. So I'm waiting for Civ 7. I'm looking forward to see what that'll be like. But I haven't played Civilization in months. It goes that way because I just haven't had time. We had so much. There's so much work to prepare for the weddings this summer and the trip to Italy. And now that I'm back, it's like, oh, I could take a deep breath, but we've got the conference coming up in September. And now with Nancy's death, and I've got other funerals that some sort of relationships to the church doing. You wind up as a pastor, you certainly do funerals for your own people, but you often wind up doing funerals for other people that sort of have connections to the church, because when someone dies, often if they don't necessarily have a deep church connection, they don't have anybody to bury them. And one of the saddest things I see lately is just the giving up on burial rituals in our culture. People die and there's no service. one of the videos I want to make my own video on the whole Olympic kerfuffle, because sort of once you lose God, ceremony in a secular culture just sort of doesn't have a container. That's part of what we're seeing. Well, part of what now the sacred, but it has to be more detailed and definitive than that. Part of what God does, or the gods in the ancient world, is they give structure to ceremony, because there's actually a relationship that you're working in the form of the ceremony. Once you no longer have any relationality, ceremonies just kind of, they're sort of like Jello without a bowl, just kind of run all over the counter. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So, all right. Question for PVK. Could there be a PVK successor? All of these flotillas of channels are very nice, but none of them get near close to the attention your channel gets, either from the internet randos or from TLC people. If it suddenly got banned or something, the TLC would go under, maybe because there'd be maybe there could be a PVK successor that they could post and stream. We'll see what develops. I didn't plan this. When we have a conference, when I had conferences with Peugeot and Vervaeke, I'm the easiest guy to talk to. I mean, everybody wants to talk to Jonathan Peugeot and John Vervaeke, and but will other channels grow? Could be. There's a formula to growing a big YouTube channel. There's lots of formulas for that, in fact. Now, none of them are surefire, and there's a fair amount of timing. My channel would not have grown as it grew in terms of the timing. And part of it is, for some strange reason, the uniquenesses of who I am and contributes to the channel being what it is. It's just, everything's always that way. Grim Grizz could stumble on a new idea about how to do his channel and dwarf the rest of the channels. Could happen. Could happen to Chad. Could happen to Karen Wong. Could happen, or could be someone who hasn't even started a channel, but something will happen and boom, their channel blows up. Life is like that. I mean, look at Jordan Peterson, obscure college professor, had some traction in some areas, was on Ontario Public Television for years. And it was just the man and the moment found each other, and whoosh. What we're enjoying, you see this in churches too. What we're enjoying now, we should just enjoy, because these things come and go. The Peterson phenomena is not what it was in 2017, 2018. It doesn't mean it's not there. It's just different. What will become of John Vervaeke's big project, the Silk Road project? I don't know. What will become of the Symbolic World? I don't know. These things take on a life of their own. And so while we have what we have, whatever it is we have right now, we should enjoy it. We should live into it. But again, the goal of it should be human flourishing and helping each other flourish, encouraging each other. And in this crazy, mercenary, politically cutthroat, culture war laden YouTube, to actually have a space where, yeah, we can talk about the stuff we talk about in the culture war, and we can be friends, and we can enjoy each other. So Jacob Federecci can say Paul of Tarsus is a liar, and he can say all kinds of things about the CRC and so on and so forth. I'm still his friend. and part of it is, the one thing that will get you banned from my channel would be trolling Freddie. I mean, that's one area. If I find people being mean to Freddie or trolling Freddie, you can troll me all you want. That's fine. But Troll Freddy, I will ban you. I will ban you so fast. You'll never see the likes of any of this. Because, you know, it's what we should do for the vulnerable. But what we should do for each other is live into this. You know, maybe someone's going to discover dog bark on his little boom box where he presses play for these blues beats, and then he plays his harmonica and he sings the psalms. It's awesome. Into the Freddie and Paul show. You know, there are times when it's unwatchable. I get it. I totally get it. But, you know, when Nancy passed, you know, was it Wednesday afternoon? I was sort of scrolling through the back catalog of the Freddie and Paul show, and, you know, Nancy doing her thing, and it's about the relationships. It's always about the relationships. It's the, you know, it's the communion of the saints. So what we have right now, we have right now, and let's enjoy it. Let's live into it. You know, at the Chino conference, I used the poets of my growing up years. Most of you won't know the name, just like I don't know the names of the contemporary musicians. But if you look at if you look up "Time in a Bottle" on YouTube, just type in "Time in a Bottle" song on YouTube. If I could put time in a bottle, can't put the TLC in a bottle. Or look up Dan Fogelberg, "How Can I Make Love Stay?" Can't make love stay. You can't put time in a bottle. And this is sort of a big lesson for life. When you receive a blessing, when you receive grace, just hold it with an open hand and just thank God for it, because it's a good thing. And in the age of decay, it'll probably go away. Now, I've got a lot more thoughts on eternity and John Vervaeke's work, because I think actually functionally, you're not going to have the sacred without sacred time, which is eternity. And how does that relate to his two worlds mythology? So, let's see what I can do. Let's give away some more memberships. Membership gifting. There it is. Gift 5 now. There we go. There's more memberships out there. So yeah, enjoy the TLC while it's here, because it's different than it was 3 years ago. And if it endures, it'll be different 3 years from now. And maybe, you know, God forbid something happens to me and I can't do this anymore. Maybe, you know, maybe it'll be Christian Baxter that sort of becomes the center of it, or maybe the CRC minister that you don't know anything about that starts broadcasting on YouTube, and it centers around him. There's all these different waves. Where did my wrench go? Yeah, I limited the wrenches. And YouTube is playing around with the managing thing. So I got complaints about there's too many wrenches out there. So I pared down the wrenches. And if things get bad, I'll throw some more wrenches out that don't take it. I don't take it personally. I just sort of prioritized a few people. So hardly anybody has wrenches anymore. But anyway, there it is. All right. Protestant Apostolic Succession. Why are we asking short questions of a tall guy? Is he some kind of expert? What would he possibly know about short? All right, here's one. How come my wife is shorter than me, but she doesn't know about anything in the fridge except what's on the top shelf? There's a tall question. Do you ever skip an aisle in the grocery store? You can see a short person and don't want to help. No, I have never done that. It's a joy to help short people. It's a joy to help short people. I just hope that they have mercy on our tall privilege. And tall is a privilege. Being tall when you're a young guy helps you get girls. Being tall, I used to work at this lumber yard, and I was just a summer employee, and a lot of the other guys were there all year round. But because I was taller than them, when people would come in asking for help, they'd look to me because I was tall. And it's like, I'd learned enough psychology to know that. So the tall should help the short, and the short should have mercy on the tall when they're on airplanes, especially. I don't know what to do with that little icon in that question. Question for PVK: is it possible for your podcast? Yeah, Spotify. So, in order for me to put my podcast on Spotify, I have to edit the back catalog on Podbean. And I've been reluctant to do that because in the early days with the Randos Conversations, the Zoom would spit out an audio and a video, and Podbean could take that form of audio compression without a problem. And then Spotify came along and I'm like, oh, okay, I can do this on Spotify. And I realized I can't just port those to Spotify because they're not MP3. So at that point, I started always taking the extra step of taking the Randos Conversations and converting them to MP3 and posting them. So from that point on, it can go to Spotify. But in order for me to either I have to go through and convert all of those old Randos Conversations to MP3 or truncate the back catalog so that I can port Podbean to Spotify. And it's those kinds of administrative details that I really hate. And so I avoid them and I don't do them. And for a long time, I've known I should really port this thing to Spotify. But it's like, I don't do I really want to? It's so much more fun reading about popes than farting around with back catalogs. So that's why I'm a lazy, selfish podcaster. So that's the reason. So maybe one of these days I'll do it. Writers of Meaning anthology request. Would anyone watching Paul's Q&A be willing to be reviewer of the book? Oh, go to writersofmeaning.com. There it is right there. Right there. I'll put the link in the chat. Yeah, asking community members for help. I probably should do that. But in my experience, so often getting help is more work than doing it yourself. Because then it's like, okay, well, I got to get permission to this, and then I got to do that, and then they're going to have questions. And, you know, I've been a solo pastor in a church for a long time, and I do a lot of this stuff myself because I've had help at church for a whole bunch of things, and I so often learn that my helpers require more time and energy from me than if I just did the darn thing myself. That's part of the reason I'm a small church pastor. But yeah. Have you ever considered developing your channel into a relational network similar to Grail Country or Fred? I don't know what you mean by that. For example, you could have, say, Luke or Chad do Randos Conversations under the bridges of me. Oh, okay, I see. When you're on vacation. I've thought about that. I haven't done it. And I don't feel bad about not having done it because I figured that there are other channels and that when I'm on vacation, go to Grail Country, go to Friday Morning Nameless, go to Randos United, go to Karen Wong. There's tons of other stuff out there. Pay attention to them. Maybe that'll help boost some of the other channels. So me being gone isn't a bad thing. It's always just been my channel, and it's a hobby. It really is. You know, maybe someday it'll become more of a profession, but it's a hobby. I was watching Thomas Flight this morning about acting in characters. I thought, ooh, that'd be a fun thing to sort of make a video about. It's just kind of a little labor of love. So if I made it into a thing, then it would be a thing and not just a little personal hobby. So just kind of keep it as a hobby. Do people keep their tattoos in their resurrected bodies? Oh, that's a good question. They'll be redeemed or transformed in some way. I don't know. That's a great question. Jesus had his scars. Let's see, where were we at on time? All right. Okay. End of questions for August 2. There we go. Why didn't you ask John Vervaeke the tough questions like, how is you talking to Hermes different from New Age channeling? You know, my point with talking to John was, John, what do you think this is? That's my question to him. Because me trying to convince him of something that I think it is, I have no idea what's going on when he talks to Hermes. And for me to presume I know, I just don't think that's good mental health. And now there's a whole list of options of what it could be. But it's sort of like trying to get into the head of Paul of Tarsus, or in the head of Barbara Ehrenreich. I don't know what's going on with John. So I want to ask him questions. Now, tough questions. I didn't think the questions I asked him were easy, but the point isn't to sort of jam him up and put him in a corner, because I don't think I'll get better answers from him if suddenly the conversation is contentious or conflicted. I mean, that's sort of the journalist strategy. Well, let's get this high status person and let's make this conflicted, because then what quality of answer will you actually get out of someone when you make them defensive? Will it be more truthful? Or are you just looking to spike drama into the already dramatic, strange social media or media context that we have? So it's not my point. I'm not a journalist. In many cases, I'm a friend. And the way you begin is, well, what do you think this is? Well, what about this? Well, what about that? And actually, if you make someone defensive, you're going to get worse answers. And by worse, I mean less truthful. I mean, cops know this. You know, something happens and you're sitting there talking to cops and they're your buddies and they're asking you questions and they just seem nice questions. Lawyers walk in there and say, don't talk to them. Why? Because you're acting like they're your buddy and they're not your buddy. Well, I am John Vervaeke's buddy, so I'm going to talk like that to him. I'm not going to jam him up to make him defensive. That's doesn't help anything. I'm not going to get more truth out of him that way. I want to know what he thinks, because I mean, we could speculate about what went on with Paul of Tarsus, and we could speculate about what's going on with John Vervaeke. I have no idea what's going on with John Vervaeke. And the idea that he knows, well, that's doubtful too. So, all right, where are we at? Yeah, I owe Cassidy an email. You know, you get home and you start digging out. So I got home on a Wednesday night, so Thursday, so you're all jet laggy too. And like Thursday to Sunday, it's like, okay, got to get a sermon in the can. One way or another, it's got to get a sermon in the can. Don't have time for a Heidelberg Catechism video this week, so get a sermon in the can. Good. Monday, it's like, okay, I've got a full week this week, so I should be able to, get some church things under control, and maybe I'll get a Heidelberg Catechism video out this week, and I'll have my sermon. I might have time for some randos, and I'll have some thinky-talky commentary video, and it'll be sort of a normal week, and then Nancy dies, and it's like, ooh. My schedule just evaporated because there's gonna just be a lot to do with, and when different people die, there's different amounts of work. Sometimes when someone dies, everybody's been waiting for them to die, and everything's in order and the plan is set and the funeral is paid for and everything is just ready to go. So it's like, oh, okay, they died, and okay, here's the funeral. Blah, 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 blah. That's not the case with this one, because we weren't expecting her to die and nothing was ready. And she's got 2 kids that were dependent on her in different ways. And so, and 3/4 of my council is away on vacation right now. I mean, they were here while I was gone. And then, when I came back, they're all like, oh, okay, Paul's holding the fort. We can all go on vacation. And Nancy dies. I'm like, oh. So that's the way it goes. What might it take for Jordan Peterson to move his message from hypervigilance to grace and mercy? Chad the Tangerine, good question. Also, who brings more to the church, Jordan Peterson or Tammy? That I can't answer. I saw Tammy was on Perry's podcast, but I haven't listened to it. First of all, part of Jordan is his personality. One of my New Testament professors said to us, someone else, some old minister had said to him, there's plenty of oral tradition in Protestants too. He said, at some point you have to ask yourself, are you going to be a preacher of law? Or are you going to be a preacher of grace? And it's for that reason that a number of years ago, I started the protocol of misery, deliverance, gratitude in my sermons, because the world is scary. The world is chaotic. People don't behave themselves. It's very easy to adopt a posture of demand and admonition. And that's what Jordan has done. And again, there's plenty of room and need for demand and admonition in the world. Okay? Because the world is scary. Things are a mess. People don't do what they should. All of that is true. And so one of the things that you see culturally is that admonition is the primary posture of messaging. You should do that. You shouldn't do that. Do this, do that, do this, do that, do this, do that. And then just the volume goes up and up and up and up and up, and people are screaming and coercing and manipulating and threatening. So much of the world is like that. I have overcome the world, Jesus says. Finally, what I have to give is good news, not good advice. And this is a theological posture. It's a confessional posture. And what misery, deliverance, gratitude at the end of my sermon forced me to do was always end on a note of gratitude. So this little corner, something we're enjoying right now, something that we are seeing fruit from right now, something that people are flourishing in right now. It is a gift of grace. You didn't earn it. You didn't buy it. You contribute to it. Maybe you've sacrificed for it, all of those things, but none of us could have sort of aligned everything so that it would happen. It's just a gift. So your first posture should be gratitude. Thank God for the gift, the good gifts that he's given us. Misery, deliverance, gratitude. Yes, the world is scary. Yes, people don't behave themselves. Yes, the age of decay is going to take everything from you, including your life. And much of the work that you ever do will not last or survive the age of decay. That is the reality of this world. Deliverance. Jesus is King. That's what I believe. Jesus is Lord. That's what I believe. What does that mean? That means that, is there nothing for us to do? No. And as I get into the Heidelberg Catechism, you'll see that the 10 Commandments come in gratitude. The oughts and the shoulds and the betters and the admonitions always come as invitations of grateful obedience. We obey out of gratitude, not out of fear. out of fear of condemnation. Now, there's plenty to be afraid of, and you can tell people, well, if you keep doing this, you will reap these bitter fruits. That is very true. And so there's a role for that. I'm not saying that there should be no admonition. There shouldn't be any of that. What I'm saying is, T-Grog, you're always in the comments section, and it's always sort of the comments section are sort of, and that's the way for a lot, sort of an opportunity to sort of do your thing. And that's fair, but you should do your thing more on the live streams, because then you'll actually, with a richer environment, you'll actually be able to have more of a conversation. So I know you've done that before, but you should do it some more. Anyway, see, I just gave admonition. I just did it. I can do it. It's perfectly legitimate. It's perfectly fine. But I think Jordan's predominant posture towards admonition is a function of his theological framework, which remains fundamentally law. Here are the laws of the world. Here's how you can arrange your family. Pick up that cross and carry it uphill. Clean your room. Do all of these things. And again, it's all good advice. And it's wonderful. But so I do funerals. And it's true of people who I bury. They've never done everything right. They've done some things right. They've done some things wrong. They've achieved some things. They failed other things. There's no admonition I can give to a corpse, because they're just going to lay there. But I can preach grace, that there is hope, and that there is encouragement. And that Jordan Peterson is warning young men and young women to straighten out their life and do things better because there are bitter fruits for poor decisions. Absolutely. That's fine. That's no problem. But I am an announcer of good news, that he is risen, that Jesus is Lord, that he has ascended on high, and that he has overcome the world. And for those of you that have the strength to clean your room and pick up your cross and do all of those things, Jesus' admonition is to pick up the cross and follow him. Jesus has plenty of admonition. It's absolutely fine. But I want the predominant message that I give to be grace. That God loves you. That he has seen your miserable attempts to save yourself in this world. And that he has power to give you to do better. And that even when you fail, he is able to make good things come of your failures. That's a needed word in this world that is all admonition. And what will it take for Jordan Peterson to say that? I think he'll have to believe it first. And I don't think he believes it yet. Because what he's getting from the Bible are all admonitions. And the Bible's full of admonitions. And that's fine. But what he's not getting from the Bible is, be of good cheer, little flock. In this world you will have trouble, but I have overcome the world. And so until he has a vision for the victorious resurrected Christ, he'll major on admonition. So I hope people heed his admonitions, at least the good ones, and clean up their rooms and improve their lives, and those will bear good fruits. It's all fine and good. But I am finally a minister of a message of good news, which is that Jesus is risen, Jesus is King, Jesus is Lord, and he has overcome the darkness. And in the end, after all of the misery of this world, Christ will reign. And how, the details of how he sorts that out, I will leave to him, because I'm no means smart enough. But I trust him for that. And as we go through the Heidelberg Catechism, you will hear that message. Because I am finally a minister of grace, not of law. So maybe that will explain both some critiques about me and why I do what I do. Oh, T. Grogan. Ask yourself what you are a minister of. All right. What is the most surprising thing on your recent European trip? The most surprising thing is how powerful the Renaissance is still. So, of course, you have the tableau, you have this Olympic drag queen, Da Vinci. But remember, Da Vinci made that. That's a representation. That's Da Vinci's representation. It's a masterpiece. And when I got to Milan, it was one of the things I wanted to see, but just like the Vatican, if you want to see some of these big things, again, when you go to Italy, some of the top tourist things, if you want to see the Sistine Chapel, if you want to get into the Vatican Museum, if you want to see the Colosseum, you need to plan months in advance and work hard to get tickets if you want to pay normal price and not buy them from scalpers. Okay? Tourist tip if you go to Italy. So I didn't have a ticket for this to see Da Vinci's Last Supper. I would have loved to have seen it. I've got an audio book, a biography of Da Vinci in my Audible, and I plan to listen to it. And so there'll probably be some Da Vinci stuff coming out. He's an interesting figure. But the Renaissance colonized at least the Italian church to a deep degree. And the Renaissance, I'm sort of Pageauian in this sense. And I much better understand Jonathan Pageau's pushback against the Renaissance. And you really see that when, let's say, you visit a Renaissance-laden and decorated cathedral, and then you go to Venice and you look at Basilica San Marcos. Because I walked into that basilica and it's like, oh, yeah, Byzantine influence. And we had a tour of the Uffizi Museum, which was really helpful. A young man, my daughter did a lot of the prep work for this. And so she secured this tour guide and got us all organized and got our tickets. And so we're able to do some of those major tourist things. And yeah, it really helped me understand a lot more about, okay, why these churches are the way they are and what the messages of these things are and how they are functioning. And a lot of those thoughts continue to ruminate in me. And since I've gotten back, I'm continuing to read Italian history, and I'm continuing to read now papal history. And I've got more Renaissance history books that I'm working through and thinking about. And so I'm trying to get a handle on what the Renaissance was and how that changed at least Italian Catholicism. And of course, the interesting thing about Catholicism, and I think this is probably true of Orthodoxy as well, and to a degree true of Protestantism, but remember, Protestantism is birthed post-Columbus. And so there's a global aspect to Protestantism that is different from Catholicism and Orthodoxy. So I look at the Renaissance realism. And see, it's interesting because on one hand, you have this realism come in. And at the other hand, you also had this reawakening of, they start digging up these statues from the Romans, and they're like, wow, we've lost a lot. The Romans and the Greeks could make statues like, and of course then Michelangelo starts sculpting, and at the museum in Florence that has the David, they have these other statues, these unfinished statues that Michelangelo abandoned. and they're fascinating. They're haunting. So but then some of what in my Protestant iconoclasm I came away with was be a little careful with images. They're really powerful. And the images made in the Renaissance, again, the people who made the Olympic presentation chose a Renaissance representation because that had a lot of cultural power. And it's an astounding thing walking around watching all of these many people who are not Catholic and not even Christian lining up to look at, let's say, David. And of course, David is nude because this is a connection back to antiquity and the Roman period and the Greeks. That's why David is nude. And of course, after a while, then they start putting these little fig leaves covering up the private parts, and they got to take them off again. And then, of course, you had sort of just a little bit comes into my sermon on Sunday about this because, of course, and Peugeot made a comment of this recently in one of his videos where you see Jupiter or Zeus, and then they start sort of depicting God the Father in terms of Zeus or Jupiter. And it's like, and I haven't gone through yet and organized my thousands of pictures that I took, but I paid attention to depictions of God the Father. And, Jonathan Peugeot says, predominantly the Orthodox have avoided that. So, yeah, I'm still mulling that, thinking about there's a reason the Protestant reformers said we need to take a step back from these realistic images because the Protestant reformers were pastors, and they were very much in touch with people in the pews in the local church. So John O'Malley's History of the Popes, the first chapter, he gets into a little bit, well, what exactly is a pope? They're a bishop of Rome, but they're also an earthly king for a long time of the Papal States and then of Rome. And then, of course, Italy conquered Rome from the Pope and made the Pope a prisoner of the Vatican. It's astounding history of the papacy. It's astounding history. So, no, as some have noted on Twitter, best comment on Twitter was I put out a tweet that I was heading to Rome, and somebody said, internet goes wild speculating about the subtext, something like that. This is a great tweet. I said, no, I'm not heading to Rome. I left probably having a better understanding of why the Protestant reformers wanted to step back from the art and the imagery and the relics, so going into one place, and there's a reliquary right there by the altar, and you kind of go down into it, and here are the chains of Peter. It's like, oh, and Cale said he's going to talk to me about that. That's good, because I don't want to straw man the Catholic Church, and I'm trying to be very careful to not do that, to understand that in many respects all of this stuff is more complex than I realize. But so there you have the chains of Peter. Like, oh. And then I went to another church, and there was the manger. It's like, really? And right away, 60 years of Protestant formation kicks in. I think, is that really the manger? Is that really the manger? But, I was listening this morning under Pope Pius XI, when he was sick and dying, he wanted to be buried under the altar in St. Peter's Basilica. And when they went down there, they took off a marble plaque and a wall collapsed, and they discovered, oh, there's something down here. And it was a little shrine to Peter from the 2nd century, and then 10 years of archaeology. And, part of what was cool in some of these cathedrals, they had like a basement where you could go down and you could see some of the mosaics from let's say the 4th century church or the 12th century church. And they had some of the crypts of some of the people that were buried there. And I mean, it's super cool. It's super cool. But as a pastor, when I look at it, I think, wow, I wonder how this works in people's lives, because I can see why the reformers were a little bit worried about something like, let's say, the bronze serpent that God tells Moses to build for the people to look on to survive the snake bites, and then becoming an idol and a stumbling block for the nation. Yeah. And again, Protestants, as Richard Rowland has nicely articulated, Protestants are not immune to any of this. We have our own icons and statues, and now we're a little more careful about where we put them. Usually, Lutherans not so much, but Reformed people. So, and I will get to the Heidelberg Catechism where it talks about statues. I did a lot of thinking about looking at the Renaissance art and the Heidelberg Catechism comment about, oh, but this is education for the illiterate. And I thought, okay, what education will they get from this? Because one of the things that you notice is that it's a very selective canon. There's, Mary and the Christ child, the crucifixion. I mean, if you have a super low resolution of Jesus from looking at the imagery, you see this woman with a little baby boy, and you see a guy on a cross. That's kind of the lowest resolution. So anyway, interesting stuff. I got someone calling me. I gotta land the plane. I was hoping to just do some chatting, but I gotta land the plane because I've got calls coming in from people who are involved in preparations, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so I gotta speed. What does life look like in a world of Christians with, say, twice as much the fruit of the Spirit as us? Let me play some branding. I should answer this call. Let's see. So sorry about this, but that's what branding is for.
The catchphrase I say go to church. And what I mean by that is, in some ways, you have to engage in the human relationships around you. That's like the best way to go about that. You have relationship, you have a family, you have some kind of community around you. And so that's the best place to go, because in some ways that's the place that will have this procedural aspect to it that will ground the other stuff. It's like if you have to to help your kids with their homework, or you have to do this kind of really grounded stuff that has very little to do with the ideology. You get engaged in other people's lives, then it binds you in a different way, right? It binds you.
And then like my father would, he was going to church, and I wasn't really living with him, but he was going to church, and he would like kind of, those are elements of this conversation. I got to go to church.
It's being part of a church is part of Christian discipleship. And in that word discipleship, there's this word discipline, which is, it's a discipline to go to church.
What would be so great about actually going to a church is like you start going to a church so that when you do need like to be prayed for. When you have something to be prayed for about, you have a place to just say that.
You're dead on right, Grizz, and that is what the church is for. To know and be known, to love and be loved, to have a place to go where people can pray for you, where they will welcome you in. And this is, again, part of why I'm, I want churches to have estuaries, because it is, I know that it is difficult in many churches for people to, in a sense, come in and bring their real self. And what I mean by that, people have to say what's on their mind, or you can't wrestle with them. It's like, so Plato, as John reminds us, is broad, so he's a wrestler. You can't wrestle over a screen. So maybe if it's paintball for Jesus, maybe it should be wrestling with Plato. Because, and in church, in a real space, now often it doesn't happen. I understand that, but at least there's a chance to actually have a relationship with grit. And that's part of why churches are local, they're relational, they're face-to-face, they're in real life.
Said about why would young people want to go to church, and I feel like I want to have some kind of dynamic message or something that if they do find some reason to come, I'm trying to fish, so I'm throwing bait and I'm trying to hook somebody. It's what Paul is doing too. He said about being evangelical, evangelism of some sort.
Well, fishers of men is the promise.
Yes, correct.
Possessed. We did go to church today. I took communion.
I don't go to church to think or to rationalize God. I go to church to worship Him. Right? And that's, I'm happy with that. I'm very happy with that. And afterwards, during coffee hour, we can all argue about the God of our understanding, right? Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think that the wild twin, the thing that led to my sort of dawning to consciousness of Christianity, it was a 101-day vigil that I did in a forest. And I went into the forest.
You don't have to go crazy. Yeah. You actually have to go, you have to humble yourself and be, and do it right here, right now, right?
Get up. I like how Father Schmemann talks about it for the life of the world. He says it starts when you get up and get ready and you walk or you go to church. So you start those are simple. I get up, I brush my teeth, I take a shower, I put on clothes, I go, the things of life, and we're ascending up into heaven.
All right, I'm back. We got to get through this and then get on with planning a funeral. Hunter Glenn asked a couple of questions about the fruit of the Spirit and measuring. This gets into the whole question of truth relations. Is the world better or worse than it was 2 years ago? That's a really hard question to answer because you can't sort of take the world and put it in a measuring glass. And you can't take the Spirit and put it in a graduated cylinder. So the real question behind, let's say, Peugeot and Alex O'Connor's conversation, where Alex O'Connor was sort of probing Peugeot, was, is this the best of all possible worlds? And Alvin Plantinga writes about that. I should reread his book. I can't lay eyes on it right now. I think it's God, Freedom, and Evil. And when Alvin Plantinga wrestles with the problem of evil in a technical philosophical sense, that's sort of where it draws down to. And so, whereas on an individual basis, I might ask that Christ fill me with the Spirit more than he has. And that's not an uncommon prayer. And often in church, we say, "Come, Spirit, come." What does that mean, and what does that look like? Hard to know. I think sometimes people think that that will be sort of, I think about Elizabeth Oldfield and Peter Hitchens' conversation, that'll just be, I'll be happier. It'll sort of be like more caffeine in me. And I don't think it's like that. Because when my Jesus quotient goes up, let's say, if I could talk in those terms, it probably becomes even more cruciform. Because there's an interesting relationship between the Spirit and cruciformity. So if after only 3 years of public ministry, Jesus' life ends in an execution, what does that say? So I think we should continue to ask to be filled with the Holy Spirit and to be clothed with the Spirit and all that New Testament language. But it might look surprising. It might look surprising. Free William, who would be selecting for your first pick in the TLC fantasy football draft? I don't know yet. I have had zero time to research. I got started. So when I got to this church, there was a church fantasy football league. And back in the day, people were doing it all by hand, just from the scores in the newspaper before it went online. And a bunch of guys in the church were doing it. And after a couple of years, they let in the pastor. And so I've been doing it ever since with the church league. And before YouTube and before how many other kinds of projects I got myself involved in, I had time to like research, and fantasy football is all about research. And so I had time to research, but ever since YouTube and Jordan Peterson came along, I've had like no time to research. And so I used to be really good with fantasy football. I used to do really well because I would research, I would do my homework, and I would draft well, and I would set my lineups well. And I've been a crappy fantasy football player lately. So yeah, I'm a crappy Civ player right now because most of my time, energy, and attention gets pointed to more interesting things. But fantasy football is still fun. And so when Nate said, "Oh, let's do this one online," okay, because I'm already drafting and setting lineups and doing research for one league, to add another one, not a big deal. Steve McGee, I've been exposed to the idea of asceticism and wonder why I never really heard about it growing up. As modern CRC pastor, what are your thoughts on asceticism? Do you think it might help with some of the chronic problems of our age? Part of what happened in Protestantism, in the later part of the 20th century, as anti-Catholicism was receding, there was a movement in Protestantism, talk about spiritual disciplines. You can read Richard Foster, A Celebration of Discipline. You can read Dallas Willard, all of his work, Renovare. And so part of what had happened was there was a reawakening of traditional Protestant disciplines like meditation, like fasting. And early on in sort of the Protestant Catholic fight, those things had been sort of condemned by Protestants. And over the last 30, 40 years, there's been a reintroduction of those things into the Protestant world. And I think that's part of the fact that the protest is slowly ending and the church is coming together in some ways that it hasn't before. So these are good things. I mean, a lot of ascetic disciplines are there to train our bodies in self-denial and self-control so that we can live holy lives. There's nothing wrong with that. There have been various forms of Protestant asceticism that haven't been pitched as asceticism. Sabbatarianism, frugality, all of these things that were very common in Protestant groups. Now, one of the things that is true, Protestants don't have a monastic tradition, but in some ways, part of what happened in Protestantism is that the nuclear family became the new monastery for Protestants. And so things like disciplined. So, for example, in Latin America, there was sort of a sense that Protestants did better with their nuclear families than the Catholics did. Protestant fathers spent more of their money, often because they weren't drinking or gambling, spent more of their money on their children. Protestant fathers paid more attention to their wives, and there was less of sort of a double standard where you would have your wife and you would have your mistress. And a lot of these things in some forms of Latin Christianity sort of prevailed in Protestantism, and sort of in terms of their one speed. I mean, Catholicism, Charles Murray talks about Catholicism as sort of two speed. There's sort of the super Christians who are the monastics, and then they're the regular Christians who are supposed to sort of give money to the monastics, have the monastics pray for them. But, you know, you can have a mistress. You don't really have to go to mass. You don't really have to do confession. And I know that there's a caricature in there, but there was sort of the two speed that Charles Taylor talks about that was in Catholicism. In Protestantism, the idea was there's no monks, there's no super Christians. Everyone is a saint. And the demands of Christ of, let's say, marital fidelity, of caring for your children, of sobriety, of earnestness, and taking the kinds of devotions that, let's say, monks had towards prayer and those kinds of disciplines and applying them, let's say, to your work environment, the Weber thesis, et cetera, et cetera. So now there's sort of a rebalancing of a lot of that. Protestantism has gotten into the sacramental traditions, and some of the Christian disciplines have gotten into Protestantism. So some of those differentiations that were early in Protestant has sort of mellowed and come together. So yeah, and I think what we will see will be both the sacramental traditions demanding faithfulness of fathers, and seeing the household as the little church, and Protestants incorporating monastic traditions. So no, that's true. Marriage in Protestantism is not a sacrament, but marriage in Protestantism was almost a monastery. When Luther basically abolished the monasteries, the priests and the nuns married. And so the house became, in Protestant church circles, the little church. And so, there's I'm making huge generalizations here, and they're just quick summaries. There's much, much more to say about it. So, yeah, that's right. The Reformation did not create families. It did not. But again, in Protestantism, the nuclear family was elevated in some ways as a replacement for the monastery. And marriage, marriage always had, when you became a nun, you were married to Christ. And so, anyway, that's a huge, read Reformation's fat book. It talks about some of this, but there's way, way more to talk about. Big thing. Okay. Matthew, do you see your issue with labels in recent videos applied to yourself? Oh yeah, absolutely. And Mr. Reagan, a YouTube channel that blew up when he made a particular video. You talk about channels blowing up. One of my earliest crossover conversations on YouTube was with Mr. Reagan, and I appeared on his channel. And I was sitting with him in the Chino church, and he asked me, he basically talked like I was a conservative. And I thought, I'm not a conservative. I've never considered myself a conservative. If someone had asked me, are you a conservative? I'd say, no, I'm not a conservative. What are you? I'm progressive. That's how I would have categorized myself for most of my lifetime. And I have no idea what I am anymore. I have Beyond a Christian, I have no idea what to label myself. I'm a Protestant. Yeah, I'm a Protestant. I'm a minister. But am I liberal or progressive or conservative? I really don't know. What is God doing up there? Well, God is. Wait for this. Wait for the sermon on Sunday. You'll get an answer to that. You didn't like that I didn't answer his question. So to finish your question, Matthew, I part of what is happening now is that the seats that so many people have been sitting in are scrambled. The Republican Party today, the party of Bob Dole and Donald Trump are not a lot alike. The Republican Party has changed dramatically. The Democratic Party of Hubert Humphrey and John F. Kennedy, changed dramatically. What a progressive is today, what a conservative is today, those labels are bankrupt. It's really hard to know. What the left and the right, it's even worse. So, yeah, no, it applies to me too. I don't know where I am. I am what I am, and it's all that I am. So, all right, I have to attend to things, so I would love to let people in, but I was hoping to at least get this question and answer in. Depending on the way schedules go, next week, Lord willing, again, this is tentative. I've talked to our own Pete from Strange Theology about doing a live stream on Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson and talking about Joe Rogan's faith and all of that. And we'll probably have lots of you come in, and I still haven't sort of decided on a second guest. So Pete will be on. If you have ideas for a second guest, or even if you want to sort of nominate yourself, let me know, because listening to Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson, thoughts emerged, and we'll probably have more people on the stream and talk about that. But that's what I'm kind of thinking about for next week's live stream, if there is a live stream, because Catholicism conquered England. Should repeat. If there is a live stream, because again, given the situations with Nancy's death and funeral and everything, I don't know, but that's tentatively on the schedule. So again, sorry to leave so quickly. I'm going to do some branding, and my branding is, again, I've decided that, I often play dog bark, but I want to play some of the rest of you. I know Christian has some music on his channel, and some of the rest of you do music on your channels. So if you do music on your channel and you'd like for me to play a song of yours in the intro or outro to my live stream, one way or another, send it to me. So, and I'd prefer a song of your own composition. All right. So, because I don't want to deal with YouTube and all of the stuff that the mess that music is on YouTube. So a song of your own composition, a recording of yourself doing the song, and I'd happily play it. And then, I'll add a little crawl on the bottom with your YouTube channel. So this is Food Truck Emily. So thanks for watching.
I'm so tired of all the fighting. I'm tired of pushing what won't give. I see you weary, worn, restless. You know that ain't a way to live. I don't care for being right. I don't know where to lay the blame. If I never measure up, would you love me just the same? The slow burn war of attrition tongues are held, no holds are barred. We supply the ammunition till all we share is one big scar. I don't care for being right. I don't care if I'm wrong. I just want to understand why we never get along. And you've been slaving for the money. You say we've got bills to pay, and there are mouths we've got to feed, and you don't see another way. And I don't care if you are right, 'cause it feels so wrong that two people with this love just can't seem to get along. The years have gone, the kids have grown, the ships all passed in the night. We were rearranging deck chairs, all that matter left our side. We don't have to have the answers, we don't have to shift the blame, 'cause if we never get along, I'm gonna love you just the same.
Fast Freddy G knows it all. That's my old name, G.